the winter of 1874, 17 lives were lost in what the Colorado territorial government described as mining accidents in the remote mountain settlement of Copper Ridge. But hidden records and hushed accounts from survivors who escaped to Denver tell a darker truth. These deaths were not the result of chance or carelessness. They were murders carefully arranged as part of a sinister conspiracy, one that blurred the boundaries of trust, kinship, and survival. The bloodshed began 3 weeks after Martha Kellerman discovered that her husband of 2 years, the father of her infant daughter, was not the man he pretended to be. That discovery ignited an investigation which unraveled a decade of deception, exposing how isolation and desperation can drive ordinary people to shocking extremes. Copper Ridge sat at 11,000 feet on the eastern slope of the Rockies, 43 miles from the nearest town. Samuel Brennan, a prospector, first uncovered copper there in 1872, and within months 200 people had braved the mountain trails, chasing fortune that seemed to glimmer straight out of the stone. The settlement grew fast. Wooden cabins clung to the cliffs, boardwalks stretched across the slopes, and the single street held the Copper Crown Saloon, Hendrick's General Store, a church doubling as a school, and the assay office where men brought their findings. Yet the place suffered the same curse as most mining camps. Too few women. Fewer than 30 resided there, and most were already married or beyond childbearing age. This imbalance bred a quiet but constant tension that shaped daily life. Men brawled over perceived slights, and dances became auctions of desperation. Winters made the isolation worse, snow shutting them off from the outside world for months, forcing them to create their own laws, their own order, and as events proved, their own savage solutions. Martha Sinclair, who became Martha Kellerman, arrived in the summer of 1872 on a wagon train with 3 other single women. She was 22, sharp, and carried herself with a confidence unusual for frontier women. Coming west after losing her parents in a fire, she brought only a modest inheritance and a conviction that the frontier held opportunities closed to women back east. Within weeks she had more than a dozen marriage proposals but refused them all, instead becoming the settlement's teacher and living in a cabin behind the church. Her independence earned respect from some and envy from many. That fall, she met Thomas Kellerman, a quiet man in his 20s working claims on the northern ridge. Unlike the others, he didn't pressure her. He talked to her about books, philosophy, and dreams beyond mining. He claimed to be from Pennsylvania, an orphan raised by an uncle who had since passed. His mannerisms and laughter felt oddly familiar to Martha, though she dismissed it as the illusion of closeness isolation often created. Their courtship lasted through the harsh winter. Thomas treated her as an equal, discussing ideas with sincerity that stood apart from the rough miners. They married in April 1873 in a community-wide celebration. For a time, their life was peaceful. Thomas was gentle, their home warm, and when Martha became pregnant that summer, they seemed blessed. Their daughter Elizabeth was born during a blizzard in February 1874 after a grueling labor that nearly killed Martha. But soon after, cracks appeared in Thomas's story. On March 15th, while tidying the cabin, Martha stumbled across a wooden box of his belongings. Inside was a daguerreotype labeled "The Sinclair Family, Chicago, 1859. It showed her parents, her younger brother Thomas, and herself as a child. The boy looked identical to her husband. The shock hit her like a physical blow. Thomas Kellerman was Thomas Sinclair, her brother thought dead in the same fire that killed their parents. Yet he had hidden his identity, married her, and fathered a child. Her discovery shattered her world. At first she doubted her eyes, but as memories surfaced, the familiar laugh, the scar on his hand from childhood, the songs he hummed, everything fell into place. That night she confronted him. He confessed he had loved her since childhood, not as a brother should, but as a man. When he found her alive in Copper Ridge, he convinced himself fate had reunited them under new names. Martha was horrified. Their child was the product of a union she could hardly speak aloud. She wanted to confess to the community, but Thomas insisted it was God's will and begged her to keep silent. She relented temporarily, planning to act later. But Thomas had already begun plotting. Within a week, Sarah Henley, a close friend of Martha's who knew too much of her family history, slipped on ice and died. Soon after, James Crawford, a miner who had asked too many questions about her past, was crushed in a suspicious cave-in. Martha realized her husband was killing anyone who might expose them. Over the following weeks, Martha uncovered more evidence of his calculated nature. Hidden beneath floorboards, she found papers under different names, forged letters, and a notebook tracking the residents of Copper Ridge, their habits, histories, and vulnerabilities. Thomas had been planning long before she arrived. More chilling still were notes about eliminating not only her friends but eventually Martha herself. She learned he was preparing to stage an enormous mining explosion to wipe out most of the town, making it look like an accident while he escaped with her and Elizabeth. But her discoveries went further. Among his papers was a birth certificate proving he wasn't her brother at all. He was Thomas Brennan, a foster child briefly taken in by her family. The incest, the guilt, the murders he justified as protection, all built on a lie. Later she learned the truth went deeper still. His real name was Marcus Brennan, and he wasn't acting alone. He belonged to a criminal organization that specialized in infiltrating frontier settlements, looting them, and erasing witnesses. The night before the planned massacre, Marcus revealed his true identity as his men murdered Dr. Fairchild. He admitted to Martha that their marriage and child were nothing more than props for his schemes. Elizabeth, he said, would serve as cover in their next operation. Martha's terror turned to rage. By chance, Sheriff Henry Patterson arrived in Copper Ridge that night, tracking reports of fraudulent mining claims tied to Marcus's gang. His sudden appearance turned Martha's desperate struggle into a chaotic standoff. Marcus held her and Elizabeth hostage, boasting of explosives hidden around the settlement. In a moment of defiance, Martha exposed his secret, telling the sheriff where the explosives were stored. That split second gave Patterson the opening he needed. He shot Marcus, saving Martha and Elizabeth. But the threat wasn't over. Marcus's Confederates were still hidden across town, ready to carry out the massacre. With less than an hour until midnight, Martha and Patterson formed a plan to stop the killers before they destroyed Copper Ridge. Drawing on the knowledge she had gathered by living with Marcus, she detailed the conspirators' positions, their routines and escape routes. Together they raced through the settlement, fighting to dismantle the scheme before the charges detonated. The confrontation revealed ties between Marcus's network and influential figures in Colorado's government, exposing corruption that reached far beyond one isolated mining town. In the end, Martha's courage not only saved her community, but also sparked a territorial investigation that shut down one of the most dangerous criminal organizations of the frontier era. What makes this story so unsettling is that every revelation cuts deeper than the one before. Martha thought she was trapped in incest, then discovered her husband was a fraud. She thought she was fighting a single man, then realized he led an entire syndicate. Each truth redefined her struggle, forcing her to face not only personal betrayal but a conspiracy threatening countless lives. And the haunting question remains, if Marcus could build such convincing lies, how many other communities fell without survivors to tell their story? Was Copper Ridge the only scar on the mountainside, or just the one where fate gave a teacher the courage to resist?
The story of Copper Ridge isn't just horror. It's a reminder of how fragile trust is in isolated places and how the wrong person with the right lies can weaponize human need for connection. Do you believe everything was uncovered? Or could there still be secrets about Marcus Brennan's past that never came to light? Share your thoughts below. If you want more stories like this, tales of horror, mystery, and hidden history, subscribe, hit the bell, and pass this along to someone who lives for dark frontier legends. Justice did reach Copper Ridge, but the echoes of what happened there never really faded. Would you have acted differently in Martha's place? The night air in Copper Ridge carried a sharp chill, thin and dry from the altitude, but Martha barely noticed. Her pulse thundered in her ears as she followed Sheriff Patterson through the darkness, clutching Elizabeth tight against her chest. They had less than half an hour to stop a massacre that had been months in the making. Every creak of the wooden boardwalk beneath their boots sounded like a gunshot. Every shadow seemed alive with danger. The sheriff moved like a man used to the hunt, measured steps, eyes scanning, revolver always close at hand. He trusted Martha to guide him. Her months of living with Marcus Brennan, listening to his lies, watching his movements, had left her with a map in her head more precise than any sketch on paper. She knew where the men would be posted, what routes they patrolled, and how Marcus had planned to bring the town down. Their first destination was the supply shed near the northern ridge. According to Marcus's notes, 2 men were assigned to guard the blasting powder already stored inside. If those barrels went up, the explosion would trigger a chain reaction that could tear through half the settlement. Patterson crouched low as they approached, motioning Martha into the shadows. She obeyed, crouching behind a stack of firewood while Elizabeth whimpered softly against her shoulder. Through the cracks in the shed walls, faint lamplight spilled into the snow. 2 silhouettes shifted inside, one pacing while the other leaned lazily against a barrel. The pacing man muttered curses, his voice carrying just enough for Patterson to catch fragments. "Don't like waiting," he said midnight sharp. Not a minute before, Patterson pressed his lips into a thin line. He knew Marcus's type, tight schedules, tight control. These men would be too nervous to improvise, and that was the opening he needed. He turned to Martha. "Keep the baby close. If you hear shots, stay down and don't move until I call you." Before she could answer, Patterson slipped into the darkness like a shadow himself. Martha held her breath, straining to follow his movements. A heartbeat later came the sound of scuffling, boots scraping wood, a muffled curse, and then 2 gunshots cracked through the night. The shed door burst open as one man staggered out, clutching his chest, before collapsing into the snow. Patterson emerged behind him, revolver smoking. Inside, the second man lay unconscious, tied quickly with rope Patterson had carried for just such a moment. He dragged the body deeper into the shadows, then turned back to Martha. That's 2 down, 4 or 5 more to go. Martha's relief lasted only a moment before the weight of what remained pressed down on her again. They had minutes, not hours, and each second brought them closer to the explosion that would erase Copper Ridge from the map. The next target was the general store. Marcus had marked it in his notes as a communication choke point, the Hurricks family's lifeline to the outside world. If letters or supplies reached Denver before his plan was complete, it could expose the entire scheme. 2 more Confederates had been assigned to silence the Hurrickses and torch the building to destroy correspondence. As they approached, Martha saw lantern light flicker in the store windows. One figure moved inside, rifling through ledgers and letters, while another stood guard by the door with a rifle cradled casually in his arms. This time Patterson whispered a quick plan. "I'll draw the guard away. When I move, slip around the back. Get inside, warn the family. Lock the door and stay low. If they're alive, they need to stay that way." Martha's throat tightened. She wasn't a fighter, but if she hesitated now, the Hurricks family would be slaughtered, and Marcus's plan would move forward. She nodded, adjusting Elizabeth in her arms before creeping toward the rear of the building. Patterson didn't waste time. He tossed a small stone into the snow across the street. The guard turned his head instinctively, peering into the darkness. The moment he stepped away, Patterson lunged, tackling him into the snow. The rifle went off in a deafening roar, spraying splinters from a nearby post, but Patterson's fist silenced the man before he could cry out again. Martha slipped through the back door of the store. Inside, she found Mrs. Hurricks crouched behind the counter, clutching her young daughter, while her husband argued with the intruder, rifling their papers. The outlaw turned at the creak of the door, surprise flashing across his face at the sight of Martha. He raised his pistol, but Martha reacted before fear could freeze her. She hurled the heavy ledger from the counter straight at his head. The book struck with enough force to stagger him, buying just enough time for Patterson to burst in through the front and put a bullet between the man's eyes. The Hurrickses were shaken but alive. Patterson wasted no time explaining. "You need to get to the church basement. Stone walls, safest place in town. Take what you can carry and stay hidden. Spread the word if you can, but don't linger." The family nodded, gathering what little they could while Martha fought to steady her trembling hands. She had just thrown a book to save lives, an absurd act in another context, but in this night of horrors, it had made the difference. By the time they left the store, the clock had ticked past 11. 15 minutes remained. The most dangerous target lay ahead, the mine entrance itself. Marcus had ordered his men to rig explosives deep within the shaft. When detonated, the blast would collapse the tunnels and send shockwaves strong enough to topple the fragile wooden structures of Copper Ridge. 3 men were stationed there, guarding the charges and waiting for the signal. As Patterson and Martha approached, the sound of voices carried on the wind, low, nervous conversation, punctuated by the metallic click of weapons being checked. "This is it," Patterson said grimly. "If we don't stop them here, nothing else matters." Martha swallowed hard, her entire body trembling with exhaustion and fear. But when she looked at Elizabeth's sleeping face, she felt the same surge of determination that had driven her to defy Marcus in the cabin. "I'll help however I can," she whispered. The sheriff nodded, respect in his eyes. "Then stay close and trust me." What followed was a blur of chaos, violence and desperation. Patterson's revolver barked fire into the night as he engaged the first 2 men. Martha, driven by instinct more than skill, grabbed a fallen lantern and hurled it into the third outlaw's face. As he tried to light the fuse, flames licked across his clothes, and his screams tore through the night before Patterson silenced him with a shot. The mine entrance filled with acrid smoke, the stink of gunpowder and burning flesh. Patterson moved fast, cutting wires and scattering charges while Martha held Elizabeth and forced herself not to collapse. Her hands shook, her chest ached, but she knew they had done enough to stop the immediate threat. When the last fuse was severed, Patterson checked his pocket watch. Midnight had struck. Copper Ridge still stood. But their relief was short-lived. From the shadows of the ridge came the sound of hoofbeats, fast, purposeful. At least 2 riders, maybe more, heading straight for the settlement. Reinforcements. Marcus hadn't put all his men in town. Patterson cursed under his breath. "We bought time, but this isn't over." Martha tightened her grip on Elizabeth. The nightmare had not ended. It had only shifted shape. The hoofbeats thundered louder as Patterson and Martha crouched near the smoldering mine entrance. Snow scattered under the hooves of horses charging into Copper Ridge. Lanterns swung wildly from the riders' saddles, casting warped shadows across the frozen street. Patterson hissed, "They're not here to finish the job. They're here to clean up witnesses." Martha clutched Elizabeth tighter. The thought of more men, hardened killers trained to erase entire towns, sent ice down her spine. line. 3 riders burst into view. Their coats were long, dusted white from snow, rifles slung across their backs. One carried a saddlebag heavy with dynamite sticks. The leader, a tall man with a black beard streaked with grey, pulled his horse to a halt. He scanned the settlement like a hawk circling prey. "Brennan's late," he growled. "Signal never came. Something went wrong." Another rider spat into the snow. "Then we burn it anyway. Orders were clear." Patterson leaned close to Martha. "We can't fight them head on. Too many. We need to draw them off. Buy time for the townsfolk to hide." "The church bell," she whispered. "If I ring it, everyone will know to take cover in the basement." Patterson's eyes narrowed. "It'll draw attention to you too." "I don't care," she said. "Elizabeth deserves a chance to live." Before the sheriff could stop her, Martha darted toward the church, her boots crunching through snow. The riders spotted movement instantly. "There," one shouted. Gunfire cracked, splinters exploding from the boardwalk just inches from Martha's legs. She ducked, clutching Elizabeth close, and sprinted up the steps of the church. Inside, the cold silence felt like a tomb. She laid Elizabeth gently in a pew, kissed her forehead, and whispered, "Be brave." Then she seized the thick rope hanging from the belfry and pulled with all her strength. The bell tolled, deep and sonorous, echoing across Copper Ridge. It was the sound of warning, of urgency, of salvation. Cabin doors opened, families scrambled. The Rockies ran toward the basement, dragging neighbors with them, but the riders turned their horses toward the church. Patterson fired from the shadows, dropping one man from his saddle. The horse bolted, dragging the body into the snow. The other 2 wheeled around, returning fire. Bullets tore through the wooden siding of the church as Martha yanked the rope again, desperate to give her neighbors one more warning. Then the black-bearded leader dismounted, striding toward the church doors with a stick of dynamite in his hand. He lit the fuse. Martha froze. Patterson broke cover, sprinting straight at the man. His revolver roared, but the outlaw staggered forward anyway, clutching the burning dynamite like it was his only purpose. The sheriff fired again. The outlaw dropped, dead before he hit the ground. The dynamite skidded across the snow, fuse spitting sparks. Patterson dove, snatched it up, and hurled it into the empty street. A deafening blast rocked the settlement, blowing out windows and showering debris. The final rider cursed, spurred his horse, and fled into the mountains. Patterson leveled his revolver but didn't fire. He was saving his last bullets. The sheriff turned back to the church, breathing hard. Martha stood in the doorway, trembling, Elizabeth in her arms. The bell rope swung silently behind her. "It's over," Patterson said, "for tonight," but they both knew it wasn't. By dawn, Copper Ridge looked like it had survived a siege. Buildings were pocked with bullet holes. The mine entrance smoldered. Families huddled in the church basement, whispering prayers. Sheriff Patterson gathered the townsfolk in the street. His voice carried authority forged in 100 fights before this one. "Listen close. Marcus Brennan wasn't just some outlaw. He was part of a syndicate, a network. They've done this before, and they'll do it again unless we act." He turned to Martha. "She saved your lives tonight. If not for her, you'd be dead or buried under rubble." The townsfolk looked at her with wide eyes, some grateful, others suspicious. Martha felt the weight of their gazes like stones. She had been married to the man who nearly destroyed them. She had borne his child. Patterson continued, "Denver needs to hear what happened here. I'll take testimony, gather evidence, and ride out with a posse at first light tomorrow. We'll bring this syndicate down before it swallows another town." But Martha knew her part wasn't over. She still had Marcus's papers, the ledger of names, routes, and hidden caches. They detailed not just Copper Ridge but 3 other settlements across the Rockies, each marked for destruction. That night, by lantern light, she spread the papers across her cabin table. Elizabeth slept in a cradle nearby. Patterson leaned over the documents with her, tracing each name with a calloused finger. "God help us," he muttered. "This runs deep. Judges, businessmen, railroad men, half of Denver's elite." Martha whispered. "He lied about everything. Except one thing. He said Copper Ridge was just the beginning." Patterson straightened, jaw set. "Then we'll make it the end." The ride to Denver. 3 days later, Patterson, Martha, and a small group of survivors rode east. Snowstorms slowed them, but the urgency pushed them forward. At every stop, Martha feared the syndicate's men would appear, shadows with rifles, dynamite hidden in saddlebags. When they reached Denver, they found the capital alive with greed. Streets bustled with bankers, politicians, and railroad tycoons. Few wanted to believe their story. Who would accept that a respectable judge might fund a gang of outlaws, that a railroad investor could profit from ghost towns created by violence? But Patterson forced hearings. He showed Marcus's forged documents, the maps of Copper Ridge, and the signed confessions of captured outlaws. Martha testified, her voice trembling but clear, about the horrors she'd lived. The newspapers ran wild with the story. "Copper Ridge Conspiracy," screamed one headline. Others called her the Widow of the Ridge, painting her both hero and harlot. For weeks the trial dragged on. Powerful men tried to silence it, bribing witnesses, burning evidence, but Patterson refused to bend, and Martha refused to be silenced. The final betrayal. One night, as the trial neared its end, Martha awoke in her Denver boarding house to the sound of creaking floorboards. A shadow moved across the room. Her heart stopped. Marcus was dead. She'd seen him fall. But in the dim lantern light, the man looked almost the same. It was his brother. "I came to finish what Marcus started," the man whispered, knife glinting. "Your child belongs to us. She was meant to be raised in the syndicate." Martha's scream cut the night. Patterson burst through the door, revolver drawn. A single shot ended the intruder, leaving his blood soaking the wooden floor. Shaken, Martha realized the truth. The syndicate wasn't just an organization. It was a family, bound by blood and loyalty, darker than anything she could imagine. Killing Marcus hadn't ended it. Dozens more carried the same cruelty in their veins. Final 500 words. The ending. The trial concluded with a mix of victories and failures. A handful of corrupt officials were sentenced. The syndicate fractured, losing influence. But many slipped away, vanishing into the frontier where law had no teeth. Copper Ridge tried to rebuild. Families returned to their cabins, children played in the snow again, and miners struck picks into the earth, pretending life could return to normal. But scars lingered in every conversation, every cautious glance. Martha stayed only long enough to bury the dead properly. She could not raise Elizabeth in the shadow of what had happened. Too many whispers followed her, whispers of incest, betrayal, blood. So she left with Patterson, riding south toward New Mexico. Some said they became partners in law enforcement, hunting the remnants of the syndicate across the territories. Others claimed Martha vanished into obscurity, changing her name again, desperate for peace. What's certain is this: Copper Ridge never recovered its innocence. Travelers passing through still whispered about the night the bell tolled. The snow burned with fire, and a mother defied an empire of lies. Decades later, when the railroads conquered the Rockies, surveyors found abandoned mining camps that looked eerily similar to Copper Ridge. Burned cabins, collapsed tunnels, no survivors. Records of these towns were missing, erased as if they never existed, which raised a haunting question: was Copper Ridge the one that survived because of Martha, or was it simply the one whose story couldn't be buried? Elizabeth Kellerman, or Sinclair, or Brennan, depending on whose truth you believed, grew up carrying a secret no child should bear. When she was old enough, she asked her mother the question that haunted her: who was my father? Martha never answered. She only whispered, "You were born in fire, but you are not bound to it. Live free." History books never recorded Martha Sinclair's name. Official records listed the Copper Ridge deaths as mining accidents. The conspiracy was swept under the rug, another casualty of frontier corruption. But if you go to the ruins of Copper Ridge today, if you stand among the blackened beams and collapsed shafts, locals say you can still hear it. The tolling of a church bell in the wind, a warning, a memory, and maybe, just maybe, a reminder that some secrets never die.